This is Nayar and Kavora, and we are here with our guest, Zahir. How are you, Zahir?
Well, I'm a little bored because I can't go out.
Oh, yeah, no, I
Yeah,
know what you mean. It's
We're all trapped in our house because we're quarantined. The whole nation is quarantined, it
yeah,
seems. The whole world.
pretty much. Yeah,
But we're
it's
making
volunt.
good use of our time watching lots of Star Trek, reading Star Trek, and because of you listening to Star Trek.
Oh, thank you.
yes. So you started this audio series that's called Chronicle,
Hmm.
and it's Star Trek. So what we like to do
Yeah.
is, just first, could you tell us how you got interested in Star Trek?
Oh, well, when I first saw it as a child, when it was first broadcast. Yes, I'm that old.
Well, where'd you grow up?
San Francisco. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, but then we moved to Pensacola, Florida. Uh, oh, now that I think of it, I must have started watching it in Florida because we moved in 1966. So I probably started watching the show in Florida.
Okay, so you've
And quite
always
simply,
watched it.
yeah, I just fell in love with the show at the time.
Did you
Uh,
continue watching it throughout all the iterations?
yes, yes, indeed. Um, I watched, animated series when it came on, saw the movies. Um, I did read a bunch of the comic books and some of the novels. Um, I watched every episode of TNG, every episode of DS9. I did not watch every episode of Voyager, nor of Enterprise. Uh, but I've been watching every single episode of Discovery and Picard.
Well, what did you like about Star Trek that caused you to continue to have a lifelong passion for it?
Well, part of it is that it was built in that it was an almost all-inclusive universe. You knew, for example, there were other starships right from the start. You knew there were other starships out there, and they were every now and then you saw them. You kept hearing about other worlds, and they were being treated as real places with a history behind them. Um, that that was a world where there was different types of music. The people were still doing Shakespeare at the same time. There was alien music. Um, it was also a world that presented uh, the ideas of science fiction as first and foremost, rather than the excitement of explosions or flying saucers hurling laser beams at each other. So it was a story with interesting characters, um, often very compelling stories. And there was also this definite sense that uh, we had not peaked. There's a premise in far too much science fiction in my idea. It's often done is because I think dystopias are a way of examining issues, which is perfectly fine and valid. But the premise that we would not, that we've peaked, that the human race cannot improve, is to me a dangerous one, lest it become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm very much more impressed that Star Trek, while not portraying a completely rosy future with no problems, but it did portray a future where we'd solved a lot of our problems. And now we have to move on to new ones or more sophisticated ones. But a lot of the basic things that were going wrong at the time when, particularly when Star Trek first aired, we've gotten over. In the 60s, it was thoroughly believed, everyone was half expecting World War III. They were expecting an atomic war that would wipe us out. And yet, Star Trek showed a world where we had grown past that. That was no longer even a danger. It was a time, of race riots and fury. I grew up in the deep South, believe me, I understand. But it was a world where you saw what today we would call a multicultural cast, because there we saw a better future, and it didn't seem unrealistic. It seemed within our grasp. This seems possible. The technology is just almost magic-like, but the but the society seemed real. It seemed possible, and that I found both compelling and very, very moving.
That's excellent. And that's, you expressed a lot of the reasons that we like Star Trek and that we've been fans of it for so long. What made you decide to do this audio series, Chronicle?
Well, it's several things. First of all, is that my background is in theater. I'm a playwright. I'm a director. Here in Los Angeles, I review plays, when we have theater going on. No, we don't at the moment, but usually Los Angeles has a very large, dynamic theater scene. And I've loved being a storyteller. I've been an actor. And I was fascinated by the whole idea of fan films. I was really enjoying seeing a lot of them. And of course, as time went by, they kept getting better. Now, when Voyager ended, there was a lot of discussion online, in so much as the internet existed then. There was a lot of discussion in places like Yahoo groups and others of what would be next. What would be the next iteration of Star Trek? And we were all coming up with ideas, and I came up with one that I threw out that promptly started an enormous amount of debate, and from some people, condemnation. So part of me was appalled, and part of me was going, touched a nerve. Yeah. So flash forward, 20 years later, as fan films are suddenly just much more of a thing, and there's much larger of a community, and I'm looking at this, and I'm just saying, I'm not a filmmaker. I'm not. I'm a playwright. I don't know how to make films, and they cost an enormous amount of money. But I have that itch to tell my own version of a Star Trek story. The things that haven't been done that I would like to see. And then I was looking at this. I had some ideas. I played with the idea of trying to, find some people to do it as who were filmmaking. And after a while, just the idea came to me, well, if I do this as the equivalent of a radio show, my budget is sliced by about 99% or more. So this was the most practical way to pursue it. So what I did was I was just combined the different ideas that I liked and wanted to work on, and decided to do it as an audio series, and then started my preparation. And for 2 years, I was talking in different forums, and finally, getting the basic characters down, put out a call for actors. And frankly, since I am in Los Angeles theater community, several folks from Los Angeles theater just gladly jumped on. And so in a short while, I had the scripts ready. People started recording their scripts, and I started editing them together with the right sound effects and stuff. I got some advice from people who had done audio dramas with Star Trek, which was very useful. And the rest, they say, is future history.
Yeah, and we have always been fans of the Star Trek fan films. A lot of them are excellent, and we've visited some of the sets too when they had them open.
So let me ask you, did you have the idea for this before watching the fan films, or did the fan films inspire you to create this audio series?
Both. I didn't have the idea of it as an audio series. I had an idea of in any Star Trek forum, over the past 10 years, one of the discussions we'll always have, and is still ongoing, is what Star Trek show would you like to see? And so I've always been perfectly willing to chime in on that. And discussion and debate more and more honed my own ideas of what I would like to see. And eventually I distilled it all. So the answer is yes.
And so did you, like you put out a call for voice actors, did you? Because we do know some of the actors in Atlanta that are part of your series.
Yes, I put out a call, and several of them are people who've been really part of numerous other fan productions.
Yes, they have. Yeah.
Leslie Sawyer and Vance Owen Major basically are the two ones that most come to mind, who've been most involved. But then, of course, there's Steve Atwell and a few others as well. So, been very, very fortunate that way. I'm really, really pleased how it's coming along.
So tell us, if you were, here's the formal question that we've been trying to pull out of you. So on those message boards, post Voyager, when people were saying, if you were to create your own Star Trek series, what would be the premise of it?
Okay, the premise, I assume you're asking for the premise of Chronicle.
So was this the idea, Chronicles, that you had post Voyager that long ago?
Essentially, yes. Essentially,
okay.
Yes. The thing we're going with is the story follows 4 junior officers, 2 of whom have just graduated from the academy, top of their class. And they have been assigned to the newest and fastest ship Starfleet has ever made. Now, in the wake of Voyager, what I said worked out was that these ships have the first working slipstream drive that can be turned on for a certain amount of time, then you better turn it off. And then you have to wait to reset the computer systems and everything to use it again. And that these ships are going to travel to a portion of the galaxy where that the Federation has never been. And what happens, though, is that a series of mysteries develops that turn out to be interrelated. And these 4 characters are at the center of those mysteries. And as the mysteries become unsolved, they find a secret in the history of the Federation. This is going to cause some problems because they're going to encounter someone in this area where they're going that has, in fact, encountered the Federation before and has, when you think about it, perfectly good reason to hate them.
That does sound very interesting. And that now we started listening to it. We're not caught up yet, but yeah, I did catch on to some kind of secret thing that might be Section 31, and I like the idea of there was a murder on a Vulcan colony. I mean that I just can't wait to see what happens with that.
Yeah, well, good. There are lots more mysteries to come.
So and we were trying to figure out the time period too. I mean, I know it kind of relates to Picard. Does this dovetail at all with Picard, since it seems to take place in about the same time period?
Well, that's the interesting thing. This all was planned before Picard, and even we started working on it, like recording voices before Picard was announced.
But it's very similar the way it ties in.
Somewhat. There's a somewhat similar feel. It is actually taking place about 10 years after Picard. because Picard,
Okay.
we've been told, is taking place in 2399, and this is taking place in 2410.
Yeah, okay. I think I heard that, or I think I did get the impression that
Mm.
it's after Picard, but some
Mm-hmm.
of it almost gave me the impression that that you knew some of the Picard episodes before we got to see them.
Yeah,
But I guess it's coincidence.
I had no idea. I had no idea. All I can say is some of the folks on working on Picard and myself must have been on the same wavelength in some ways. The one thing that really stuck out, and it's just a meaningless little detail, that I had to work out what I thought happened post the film Nemesis, project out from there and from what we
Yes.
knew. So one of the things is you have to maintain the Horus supernova that destroyed the Romulan homeworld, because that's been established as canon. So I was figuring that the Romulan Empire would be in three parts. One is calling itself the New Empire, and basically is trying to reestablish what was there before, only more so. But that there was a group that, and this is the term that Picard uses, the Romulan Free State, which is
Yes.
basically a few systems centered around the unification movement that wants the Vulcans and the Romulans to reunite, which is a very different kind of state than we see in Picard. But it's kind of fun they use the same term. To be honest,
It is, yeah.
yeah. To be honest, if Star Trek Online hadn't already used the Romulan Star Republic, I probably would have used that.
Okay.
So and that's the other thing that sort of is that I had this discussion with some members of the cast trying to figure out what was the status of things like Sung type androids and artificial intelligence. And we ultimately decided, for the purposes of Chronicle, that no one yet has managed to recreate a Sung type android. It's just there's no breakthrough, and trying to make a sentient AI is it's very tricky, because about a third of the time you fail completely. A third of the time it begins to become sentient, but then it goes insane and collapses. The system collapses in on itself. And then a third of the time you get a sentient AI of some kind, usually in holograph form. But and they haven't really learned how to do it successfully. So, and I don't think that's ever that will barely be mentioned at all in Chronicle. But we wanted to decide that for ourselves, of how things, what the things were, what's going on with the Romulans, what's going on generally with the Federation. If you've watched this far, you know that, for example, at this point, everyone thinks the Cardassians are ready to ask to join the Federation. Because, yeah, I could see that easily happening in the wake of the Dominion War. And things like that. It's just we tried to work things out of how things were. And in some ways, we came with we came up with answers that seemed to be similar, in feel anyway, to Picard. Although, yeah, the story honestly has nothing to do with something 200,000 years ago. I'll skip, there's a spoiler
that part,
part.
okay.
Yeah. And
So
it's
let me
not
ask
about
you, what caused you to release the series little by little in serial format as opposed to all at once?
It basically is an example. I was following what I considered a very, very successful model, which is one of my favorite web series, which is Carmilla, a Canadian web series of episodes that were usually between 5 to 9 minutes long. And it was hugely successful. so much so that it had basically 3.5 seasons, and then an actual motion picture was made, and they have conventions. It's a very, very successful series, and I like it a lot. And I thought I loved the format as a way to maintain a series of interests. That in effect it's a series of scenes. Each episode ends on some kind of cliffhanger, and that you get just enough, like bite-sized pieces of an audio story. So you're don't have this commitment that if you're going to watch this, you're going to have to sit down and listen to 2 hours. Instead, you can just listen to one chapter one right after another.
And we're noticing that, so it's very reminiscent of the serials from yesteryear that were on the radio then, that format.
Yeah. Although not as long.
Yeah, these are much shorter, sure.
Yeah. Which I thought might work a little bit better with modern audiences, especially a show they don't know. They don't know what Chronicle is. They don't know these characters, although, we in the cast have kind of grown to love them. In fact, I was startled at which characters ended up doing certain things, which is always a good sign. That's what it means. In a way, they have a life of their own. When a writer discovers the characters just go off and do things on their own. There are two characters who fall in love. I did not know that was going to happen going in.
Interesting. So do you get some input from the voice actors as well, or do you just let the characters grow organically?
Both. Because I wrote it, and then I asked for their feedback. Well, I've been discussing the characters to some extent. For example, the wonderful actor Stephanie Dubrock, who portrays the ship's counselor, who is Endorian, Counselor Nemeth. We had a very, very long discussion because I went with the idea that the Andorians, which is not really main canon, but it's beta canon from the novels and stuff, that Andorians have 4 genders. If that's the case, that's an interesting sort of thing to approach. That this character sees things differently, and a discussion could happen along those lines. I mean, it's not anything embarrassing or anything. It's simply that a very nice conversation takes place a little later in the series that I like very much. It's very much a character thing. It does move the story forward in a way, but I was very pleased with it. And likewise, my dear friend Skaha, who portrays Ensign Draper, who is kind of this odd computer systems expert, eccentric. Actually, she was the first person cast, and she really had this fascinating way of talking, and she asked all sorts of questions I hadn't asked myself before. So that was all part of the writing process. And then I got all that, and then I wrote the scripts, and I showed it to the cast and asked for their feedback. And then I did a final draft.
And because you had the 4 junior officers, it also reminds me of, have you heard of the animated series Lower Decks that they're working on now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, just it seems like another, coincidence. Wow, you hit on another concept that CBS is going with.
Well, to be fair, that concept was in an episode of Next Generation.
It was, yes. Yeah, and I think they really wanted to build on that. Yeah.
It's a very interesting idea. I personally found that a bit disappointing because I wasn't interested in those 4 young officers. But what if those had been, you think of like 4 really, really interesting characters, but suppose you were meeting that those 4, for example, had been younger versions of B'Elanna Torres, Tom Paris, Spock, and Kirk? What if those had been those characters? Obviously, that would be completely rewriting history and all that. But if they had been that kind of compelling character, who those four were, and therefore they were not. I'm not saying that my four characters are that compelling, but I'm trying my darndest to make them so. And I think the actors are doing a very, very fine job in bringing a lot of layers and interests to those four. At least that's my opinion, but I'm biased.
Well, we're enjoying listening to this series. What are some of the fan feedback that you've been receiving?
I've had some people who have said that I've not gotten a lot of specific feedback. I did get one person who was specifically saying he thought the visuals that I was using on the YouTubes, which some members of the cast really liked, but he said, I don't think they're very effective. I don't think people care that much. He may be right. I don't know. Others have expressed, there was somebody from Britain who said he found the whole idea very compelling in the series of mysteries. But I haven't received a lot of actual fan feedback, although I noticed that the people who are subscribing to the YouTube channel and subscribing to the podcast and the people who are joining the official Chronicle Facebook page are steadily increasing. But so far I haven't got a huge amount of feedback of like asking, discussing what's going on. I wish there was more, but on the other hand, we're living.
So where's some of the first then?
Some of them, yeah. Although I was going to mention that there was a lovely chat in another podcast where Leslie Sawyer was being interviewed, and she encouraged me to call in. And we discussed for like 10, 15 minutes then that she's playing a Vulcan, a young Vulcan. She's playing Vanel, Ensign Vanel.
Yes.
And of course that she said in particular, I was so pleased about this, especially since she's doing it so well, said that it was so interesting for her to play a Vulcan who's supposed to be cool, calm, and collected all the time. And yet I'm basically putting Vanel through the ringer. There are so many scenes where if she was human, she would be having a very emotional reaction to what was going on. And I think she's doing this fantastic job of, all my favorite Vulcan characters always come across to me as a volcano that's held under tight control. Because Vulcans
they have emotions underneath. Yeah.
Yeah, they're in fact very emotional. They're much more emotional than human beings. They're much more violent than Klingons. That's why they have to hold themselves in such rigid self-control. And I think, interestingly, one of the things about Picard that's coming across clearly is since we're getting a much better nuanced flavor of Romulan culture, is how the Romulans handle that degree of passion. Basically by wrapping it up in knots and hiding themselves in corners and using rituals of secrets and levels of different names and stuff. Basically, they use a different set of rituals and things to maintain their balance so they don't go crazy and start just killing each other. So, and very often they go around killing each other anyway. So,
well, that's Romulans, yeah.
Yeah, that's the Romulans. But we understand that the Romulans and the Vulcans are dealing with exactly the same basic issues in their nature. So, yeah. And of course, I have a half Romulan in my cast. So, hey.
Yes, that was Styles. Was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. That was an interesting
his mother is
plot point,
Romulan.
Too. So you're familiar with the the CBS guidelines for fan films, and of course, and I think that it doesn't apply to your series, right? Because they're not actually video films.
Correct. Yeah. I chose to, in many ways, follow the guidelines but not all of them. But then also, even CBS doesn't demand you follow all those guidelines. It says that this is generally what we want, and if you follow all of them, you're pretty much home free. But I mean, like Vance Major Owens, he's been breaking those guidelines from day one. So, and getting away with it because, it's a matter. I think I actually saw an interview with Alec Peters, and he said something which resonated as making a lot of sense. He said the big thing that Paramount and CBS want is they don't want anything done by fans to be mistaken for something that is official. So it just can't look too much like the real thing. And there are no official audio dramas of Star Trek. Otherwise, there might be some guidelines. But also, I'm not using any of the characters from Star Trek. I've put the same disclaimer on the page every single time, slightly reworded. And God knows I'm rigorously not doing anything even slightly to generate any income from this. I am doing it because this is a creative itch, because I want to take part in Star Trek directly as an artist, a dramatist, as I am. And also I'm learning how to make an audio series, which is cool, because then I do have plans to do one that's entirely original. And this is very, very useful to teach me that. But meanwhile, I'm also telling a story I wanted to tell for about 20 years.
I mean, those are like awesome reasons to do this.
Mm-hmm. And we love listening to it.
Thank you.
And how long they are, like the segments are perfect for drives to the grocery store. You get a little Star Trek in there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the whole thing, yes, was trying to make it as user-friendly as humanly possible.
Because we download it and put it on our thumb drive, bring it into the car. So, in closing, what can our listeners look forward to in the future, and where can they find your audio dramas?
Okay, well, first of all, I really recommend. Okay, I made a mistake when I called this Chronicle because it's a little hard to find, therefore, on YouTube. I strongly recommend, there are several Facebook groups, like the official Star Trek, the Writers' Workshop, Fan Film Forum, and also our official Chronicle group on Facebook, where I post the episodes as they come up. The ones on YouTube come up every Thursday at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I also did not realize when I set that up that Picard was going to open on Thursdays. So hey, it goes to show I didn't have any inside knowledge. But so you can, those links will be in those groups. The official Star Trek Facebook group, the Star Trek Writers Toolkit, Fan Film Forum, 10 Forward Celebrate Star Trek, and the official Chronicle group, all on Facebook. That's probably the easiest you can find then, and get onto the podcast website, which is just the audio only. That's still catching up a bit. And then there's also the YouTube channel, which has also has it as the audio series, but they can find it, that is with some images, just to provide something interesting, some eye candy, as it were. What's coming up? I'm going to be very kind of circumspect and teasing, because that's in my best interest. Someone's going to get promoted of our characters. I've already hinted there is a love story that's going to appear. Actually, there are two love stories in the series. um, things are going to get really dangerous quickly.
Okay, so you do have more planned. It looked like because you're in the first season, but you're also like you've already planned a second season for this, right?
Yes, if there's sufficient interest, I know what would happen in the second season. That's when we find out all the real answers, and that's when the biggest issues suddenly come to the forefront. And that's when all of a sudden, this is when, as I put it, the fight for the Federation's soul begins.
Ah,
Well, that's
can't
great.
wait.
Yeah, we've been enjoying it. We're gonna put those links. We're gonna put some links in our show notes so our listeners can just tap onto it for easy access. Again, thank you so much for joining us and
Fantastic.
giving us some insight on Star Trek Chronicle.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.